Hello everyone. I wanted to do a video because I've received quite a few emails about a story, and it's the UFOs and the Pentagon story that's been doing the rounds recently. So I wanted to do a video because I've written an article about this following the other day I received some news which is related to this, but you may not have heard of it. Some quite troubling and disturbing news, particularly for those that have been following this sort of thing for quite a few years, like I have. So, what we've seen coming out is these, U.S. Pentagon videos about Navy pilots filming UFOs, and they're saying that they are genuine videos of UFOs. And for example, we've had the Tucker Carlson broadcast. We've had a couple from Tucker, actually. I think more than one. Been going on for a few weeks, arguably years, actually, as I'll come to in a minute. But the thing that's kind of new is that the Pentagon isn't doing anything about these threats, and they're saying these UFOs are threats. So that's the key point I want to pick up on. I'm not the first to do it. Other people have been saying this, which I'll get to a little bit. And then we've got, we're about to discover the truth, if the UFO truth is out there. Doesn't really say anything, that, does it? Which is by Nick Pope. And I'd just like to make you aware that Nick Pope describes himself, as you look at the URL here, as a paid spokesperson. So bear that in mind. I've written a bit about Nick Pope. I've met Nick Pope a couple of times. Nice enough chap, but beware. And I also like to point out that these Pentagon videos, I say they've been around for a while. For example, we had similar videos which were talked about in 2018, and then we had this Louis Elizondo chap who's basically not telling the truth. Richard D. Hall did an analysis of that in one of his broadcasts a couple of years ago. I haven't been able to find the link to that, actually, but Louis Elizondo claims to have worked at this threat assessment project at the Pentagon, but I think we can take some of those claims with a grain of salt, a big grain of salt. Also, going back a bit further, we've had a similar video which released way back in 2004, not from the US but from Mexico, with this infrared footage of Mexican Air Force filming UFOs then. And I've written that up in the past as well, and that's been talked about in the past. And this has been talked about by people like Stephen Bassett in the past, and there's a video of him. So this is nothing new. I think what is new is the spin, which is why I've written this article. And as to what some of these videos might actually be, the Pentagon claims they don't know what they are, and I think that is a lie. They do know exactly what they are, and it's certainly with one or two bits of the video. This Anton Petrov has done an analysis which I think is certainly partly correct, but just ignore the bit about aliens that he puts in there, which is irrelevant to this particular Pentagon UFO story. So going back to the article, what I wanted to point out is that this Pentagon UFO thing is just a smokescreen, because the truth, as I've come to accept it with these things, is that decades ago, flying saucers either crashed or were brought down. For example, near Roswell, New Mexico, in July 1947, I think it actually crashed at the end of June, or was brought down, and it was then recovered in early July. Bodies and material were recovered and studied. Discoveries were made relating to mental phenomena and these craft or vehicles. I'll come to that in a minute. Energy, propulsion and other technologies were secretly developed either by using or copying or merely being inspired by the capabilities of the recovered materials or items and probably beings. And if you're a bit, skeptical about this idea of aliens being recovered and so on, well, you better do some reading, for example, and some studying. A couple of years ago, nearly ago now, somebody reminded me of this alleged video, alleged alien video, I should say, of they called Skinny Bob, and it was leaked in 2011. Now, I'd seen this, but hadn't really paid much attention to it back then. I was still engaged with a lot of other research. I have been ongoing since then. But I did an analysis more recently of this Skinny Bob video, and that's linked into this article, and it's a very interesting video, and I think it is genuine. I think these things, this really is an alien, basically. You might find that hard to accept. That's up to you, but study it yourself, see what you think. It's not the only video, it's not the only evidence as well. I've written that up at length, and I'll come to that again shortly. So the other thing which needs to be understood is that weapons systems and warfare methods have also been developed from the technologies, that have been recovered or developed in black programs. Some of that technology, which manipulates matter and energy at a basic level, and it can affect gravity, was used by someone on 9/11 to destroy most of the World Trade Center complex in New York City. And the effects of the use of that technology did not disappear immediately. Now, if you're wondering about this and you don't know much about it, then please study Dr. Judy Wood's website and have a look at the videos and the slideshows there, all organised into menus here, so you can look at that. Please study that, because it is quite clear that what was done to the World Trade Center involves someone's technology, and I won't go into any more than that here, because I've spent hours and hours and hours talking about that in the past. So, why am I making this video? Well, a couple of things really, because going back, where some of this comes from, for example, about the mental phenomena, this information comes from a memo which was written in 1950 by Canadian radio engineer Wilbert Brockhouse Smith, who became superintendent of radio regulations in Canada, and he said that flying saucers exist. They're most highly classified matter in the United States government, higher than the H-bomb, and they were looking for information on mental phenomena. They were asking for help from Canadians and stuff. So you can read this memo. Now, this memo has been known about since 1979, so it's been known about for 40 years. It is never discussed on the news. And this list, going back to this list, the UFO groups, the UFO documentaries, they will mainly cover points 1 and 2. They will get into point 4 a bit. They very rarely talk about point 3. This is very rarely got into the energy and propulsion technologies were developed. That's not talked about in the mainstream very much. Occasionally you'll get, certainly not on news broadcasts, you might get the odd documentary about it. That is never discussed either by UFO groups or the mainstream media. And of course, UFO groups don't talk about what happened on 9/11. And it does connect to the UFO cover-up, and again, I've talked about that at length before, and it's in my book, which I'll mention in a minute. So somebody wrote to me this week and talked about they'd watched my talk from 2009 about Wilbert Smith, and I've linked that into the article if you want to go and watch it. This is all based on material that I was given by Grant Cameron, so it's none of this is really my original research. I just kind of compiled it and summarized it a bit, and you need to look at the Wilbert Smith material. It's very important. He knew a lot of stuff. He was a smart guy. He held 37 patents when he died, and basically, the person that wrote to me, he's got it right. He said, well, the Smith memo, you read that, you understand it, you study it, and then you know that flying saucers have landed, bodies have been recovered, and MJ12 or something like them, that in other words this secrecy committee or whatever you want to call it was set up. There's various versions of it, but I think the reality is that something like that was set up in the 1940s, and then Smith went on to investigate all of this stuff. So look at it. So what's it all about? So this talk about the UFO issue, what they need to do in talking about it is keep the technology covered up. You can't think in terms of technology. You're not allowed to think in terms of that, right? So, and this was made again clear to me because of this chap, Mark McCandlish, and you can see from the picture here what I'm going to probably come to in a minute. Now, he talked about gaining knowledge about this thing behind him, which you can see he's pointing at, which he called the ARV, the Alien Reproduction Vehicle. Occasionally he called it the Flux Liner, which was a secret flying saucer craft, an anti-gravity craft, and he learned a bit about how it worked, developed in the 1960s by the US military and US black programs, right? And he's been talking about this for years and some of the technical details. I corresponded with him once or twice, and there's a 2-hour presentation by him which you can go and listen to, and he gives you all the details of his background and how he came to know a lot of this stuff. And he's never changed his story. He's never changed his story. He's a whistleblower, okay? So what I heard a few days ago was that Mark McCandlish, I knew that he died recently in April, but what I heard a couple of days ago was that his death was due to a shotgun blast to the head, and this was posted on Robert Morningstar's blog here, UFO Spotlight, and I've linked the post there. There's lots of information there about Mark McCandlish, and there's some presentations that Robert Morningstar, I think there's one with him and one with somebody else. You can listen to that if you want, get the lowdown. It's all there. But recently, as I say, I learned this news. Mark McCandlish's suicide with shotgun blast to his head. He was going to testify for Senate UFO UAP meeting in June. His testimony would have destroyed the "we haven't made much progress" narrative. Also, the one who showed the Tic Tac was actually USAF SSP drone, so they know what it is. That would also destroy that narrative, and came out and reversed and said he made it up. Mark didn't go along with this. So in other words, Mark was going to present evidence that this narrative that's coming out with Nick Pope and Tucker Carlson, Louis Elizondo, that's all bogus. It's all bogus. It's all a smokescreen. They've developed this stuff. They've turned it into weapons. And that last bit, you won't hear that from anyone, right? You won't hear it from Greer. You won't hear it from Louis Elizondo. You won't hear it from Tucker. Nobody will talk about that. And that's why I'm making this video. Okay? So they've got this technology. And if you look at what happened on 9/11, right? And I've got a lot of video I'm going to play here. This is potentially what they're working up towards. Now, I've said this before. We said this years ago. And as you'll see, I posted this video clip in 2011, which was a portion of Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project conference from 10 years earlier than that. So we're 20 years ago now, very nearly. So have a listen to this for a minute. The frame rate is quite slow, but you should be able to pick it up.
Good morning. My name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a sixth grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Wernher von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, "Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space." And I said, teachers don't stop until June. He said, "No, you have to understand, this is February, and we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies," he said, "against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system, the first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids." And then he would repeat to me over and over, "And the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat." Well, at the time, I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear on the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
Okay, so you've probably got the idea of that. So the point here is then that we've got the COVID scam now, and if that runs out of steam, then what are they going to do next? Okay, so as I see it, they've got the potential to pull something like this off, and public who are in a state of mass fear and panic, or on the edge of panic perhaps, they would not see that this was another sideshow. So, bear this in mind. And as I said, Mark McCandlish has been killed, right? I discussed this element of things in the video with Carl James about the Star Trek Voyager, which was about cover-ups and, keep protecting narratives and doctrine and this sort of thing. And I said, if you start to talk about this sort of information in the wrong place at the wrong time, they will kill you, right? And I think that's what happened to Mark McCandlish, which is, of course, terrible. I mean, look at his Facebook postings. He was a nice guy, and he wanted the truth to come out. So, bear that in mind. So, to finish off, really, I've written all this up at great length in my acknowledged book, The UFOs and Aliens and Crop Circles. I've put all my thoughts in there. And this really does nothing to change any of that. It just, reasserts what I put in that book, I think, that what's been going on with these Pentagon videos. So, that's all there for you. Similarly, there are three other books, actually, which you might be worth you reading. They're all free PDFs. You can get paperbacks if you want. The Acknowledged book and this book, Secrets in the Solar System, Gatekeepers on Earth, that book and the Finding the Secret Space Program book, they are like a trilogy. And then, what has been talked about now with this COVID thing, they're talking about, Agenda 21 and stuff, and COVID, and that is talked about in this climate change and global warming book, which of course is the other scam which they're going to try and pull. They may try and pull, the alien invasion and the climate change, who knows, but I wanted to make this video just to remind folks and get folks that haven't seen this before to look at the available evidence and think about it and not be fooled by what's going on. So thanks very much for listening, everyone.